For centuries, the story of Atlantis has had a powerful grip on our imagination. You know the one, a magnificent, hyper-advanced civilization that was swallowed by the sea. We've seen it in movies, devoured it in books, and binge-watched countless documentaries that claim to have finally found its true location. But what if the greatest mystery isn't where Atlantis is, but why the one and only ancient source for the story, the philosopher Plato, wrote it in the first place? What if searching for a lost continent is missing the point entirely? Despite all the expeditions and so-called discoveries, not a single shred of credible archaeological evidence for Atlantis has ever turned up. Today, we're looking at why historians and archaeologists are so confident that Atlantis is a myth, and what Plato's true, and frankly more brilliant purpose, was for creating the legendary lost city. To understand why the experts are so skeptical, you have to go back to the source. And here is the catch: there is only one. The entire legend of Atlantis comes from two dialogues written by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato around 360 BCE. The dialogues Timaeus and Critias. Plato frames the story as a piece of long-lost history. His character Critias says he heard the tale from his grandfather, who heard it from the Athenian statesman Solon, who was told it by Egyptian priests, a kind of epic game of telephone. But here's the thing: no earlier Greek or Egyptian text that mentions Atlantis has never been found. It just appears with Plato. The tale describes a mighty island empire that existed 9,000 years before their time, which would put it around 9,600 BCE. This empire was located beyond the Pillars of Heracles, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, and was said to be larger than ancient Libya and Asia combined. Atlantis was a naval superpower, dripping with wealth and advanced technology. Plato describes an engineering marvel, a city of concentric rings of land and water linked by massive canals. At its center, a magnificent temple to Poseidon glittered with gold and silver. This empire was so powerful, it had conquered lands from modern-day Libya all the way to Italy. But this is not just a story about greatness. Plato tells us the Atlanteans, who were part god and part human, became corrupt. Greed, ambition, and arrogance, that is hubris, took over. In the story's climax, this corrupt empire tries to conquer a heroic, ancient Athens. This prehistoric Athens, a model of virtue and courage, heroically beats back the Atlantean invaders and frees the people they had enslaved. Right after their defeat, divine payback arrives. In a single day and night of misfortune, massive earthquakes and floods racked the island, and Atlantis sank beneath the waves, gone for good. It is an incredible story, right? It has a lost golden age, amazing technology, a heroic war, and a cataclysmic finale. No wonder we are still obsessed. The pull is so strong that people are constantly trying to link Plato's tale to real events, like the volcanic eruption that devastated the Minoan civilization on Santorini. Every few years, a new headline pops up, with explorers claiming to have found it everywhere, from the Caribbean to Spain. But this is where the treasure map falls apart, and a much more interesting story about philosophy begins. The overwhelming consensus among classicists and historians is that Plato was not trying to write history. He was a philosopher, and he used Atlantis to make a point. His dialogues were not historical records. They were thought experiments designed to explore big ideas about justice, power, and what makes a good society. To find Plato's real meaning, we should not be looking under the ocean. We should be looking at the world he lived in. What is wild is that Plato basically gives the game away in his own text. The whole story is told because Socrates asks his friends to imagine how his ideal city from the Republic would actually behave in a war. The story of ancient Athens versus Atlantis is their answer. It is a simulation, a fictional case study to test a philosophical idea. Most scholars are convinced that Atlantis is a moral parable, a cautionary tale aimed squarely at the Athens of Plato's own time. A century before Plato wrote his dialogues, Athens had been an aggressive naval empire, much like the Atlantis he describes. It grew incredibly powerful, but also arrogant, and that arrogance led to its catastrophic defeat in the Peloponnesian War. So, Atlantis works as a dark mirror. It is the embodiment of what Plato saw as the worst tendencies of a state, a society that becomes so rich and powerful it loses its moral compass and is destroyed by its own ego. The prehistoric Athens in the story, on the other hand, is a complete fantasy, an idealized version of the city that represents everything Plato valued: moderation, courage, and duty. The sinking of Atlantis is not a geological event. It is a symbolic punishment for greed and hubris, a theme found throughout Greek mythology that was never meant to be taken literally. The central conflict is not a real war, it is a philosophical battle, the virtuous state versus the corrupt one. You might say, okay, but even if it is an allegory, could Plato have based it on a real place? That question keeps the modern hunt alive. From an archaeological perspective, the answer is a firm no. First, there is the impossible timeline. Think about it, 9600 BCE. That is the Stone Age. This was a time of hunter-gatherers, thousands of years before anyone on Earth was building cities, writing things down, or working with metal, let alone creating a massive naval empire. Second, and this is the killer, after more than a century of advanced oceanography and archaeology, no credible site matching Plato's description has ever been located. This is not for lack of trying. We have mapped the ocean floor, scoured coastlines, and run countless sonar scans. The silence is deafening. A perfect example is the recurring claim about Atlantis being in Spain's Donana National Park. A few years back, headlines screamed that researchers had found circular structures buried in the marshlands, but when independent archaeologists and geologists took a closer look, the whole thing fell apart. Spanish scientists pointed out that the geology of the area was younger than Atlantis was supposed to be. An archaeologist noted that anything man-made from that period would belong to Stone Age hunter-gatherers, not the builders of a vast metallic city. It was just another case of wishful thinking getting ahead of the science. Now, aren't there real drowned worlds out there? Absolutely, and they are incredible. As the last ice age ended, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically, flooding huge areas of land where people once lived. In the North Sea, the landmass we call Doggerland used to connect Britain to mainland Europe, and it was home to people for thousands of years before the sea claimed it. Off the coast of Australia, archaeologists have found submerged Aboriginal sites with stone tools dating back thousands of years. These discoveries are hugely important. They prove that catastrophic floods did happen and likely inspired flood myths all over the world. But the evidence is clear. The people who lived in these places were hunter-gatherers. They were not citizens of a Bronze Age super-civilization with concentric canals and a temple to Poseidon. There were real drowned lands, but none of them are Plato's Atlantis. So where does that leave us? The evidence points overwhelmingly in one direction. Atlantis is not a lost chapter of our history. It is a brilliant literary invention. Plato is our only source. The timeline is archaeologically impossible, and the physical evidence simply is not there. The legend survives because it taps into some of our deepest hopes, our anxiety about civilization collapsing, and our fascination with a lost golden age. It is a powerful story about the dangers of corruption and unchecked power. Maybe the real question is not where Atlantis is, but what our obsession with finding it says about us. It shows we yearn for a past that felt more magical than our present. But it also risks overshadowing the very real and just as fascinating stories of our actual ancestors that archaeologists unearth every day. The truth of our past, written in stone and bone, is remarkable enough without needing a lost continent. What do you think? Is Atlantis a brilliant philosophical tale, Or do you believe a kernel of truth is still out there waiting to be found? Let me know your theories in the comments below. And if you enjoy exploring historical mysteries, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss our next investigation. Thanks for watching,